So next we have a presentation of potential increase to the business and occupation tax, and I'll hand this over to Eric Christensen, our finance director.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the third and final presentation of identifying potential council action regarding options to address the forecasted revenue gap in the general fund. Matt Hobson from SCS Group will be sharing information regarding the city's business and occupation tax. Matt?
Great. I will try to keep my volume up. I know sometimes it gets a little lower. Good evening, Mayor and council members. For the record, my name is Matt Hobson. I am the project manager with FCS Group, who has been working with the city over the last couple of years on a financial planning exercise and as analyzing these revenue options. Over the past several months, I've presented each of these options, which have included increasing development and development permit fees and park and recreation fees. Increasing utility taxes assessed on water and sewer utilities conducting business within city limits. And tonight's presentation concludes the review of these revenue options that are available to the city council and that do not require voter approval. Next slide. And the next slide after this, please. Over the next 10 minutes or so, I'll speak to the revenue option of increasing business and occupation taxes within the city. It's important to remember that the state of Washington also assesses taxes on businesses, and we'll only be talking about the business taxes assessed by the city of Burien on businesses that conduct business within the city limits. I'll also provide some additional context to these taxes by going over the history of B&O taxes in the city of Burien, as well as a comparative analysis of local business taxes in other nearby jurisdictions. Next slide. So the goal of these presentations over the past several months is to estimate the impacts of these revenue options in securing long-term financial sustainability for the city's general fund. Increasing the B&O tax rate is estimated to have the highest impact for achieving this goal compared to all other revenue options that we explored. We estimate that a 0.1% increase to the tax rate would generate about $1.7 million annually beginning in 2025. Next slide. As a reminder, the city's general fund, like many other cities in this state, is operating at a structural deficit. The cost of existing services is simply outpacing the increase in revenues. These revenue options, if approved, are projected to keep up with the inflationary cost pressures of maintaining existing services. So a theme I want to emphasize again is that we did not look at the cost of new services, it's simply the cost of these revenue options simply address the cost of current services in response to cost inflation. Next slide. The revised Code of Washington outlines the administrative and legal requirements for city business taxes. These taxes are assessed on gross receipts or on gross sales. Businesses are classified into one of four categories. The city can apply a different tax rate to each of these categories, but all businesses within the same category have to be assessed the same tax rate. Utilities such as power, water, telephone, and garbage services are exempt from these types of taxes. The city can assess a tax rate at a maximum rate of 0.2% unless otherwise approved by voters. As a history, in 2002, the city enacted its first B&O tax at a rate of 0.05%. In 2015, the city increased that tax rate to 0.1%. Next slide. This chart outlines the historical revenue from the local B&O tax revenue in Burien since 2011. You'll notice on the chart that revenues jumped significantly in 2015, and that's as a result of the increase to the tax rate from 0.05% to 0.1%. Since 2016, local B&O tax revenue has generally remained at around $1.5 million per year. Next slide. Of the cities that assess local B&O tax rates in the region, Burien has a comparatively low tax rate. The tax rate is higher than those assessed in Auburn and Algona, but lower than all other surveyed cities. The dotted line that runs horizontally across this chart indicates the maximum rate that the city can adopt without voter approval. That's 1/5 of 1%. The slide here outlines the tax rates for businesses classified in the services category. As I referenced, there's 4 different categories. We're showing the services category simply because it's generally the largest category in terms of revenue for cities in Washington state. I do provide a lot more detail, a lot more information in the following slide. If you can go to the next slide. There's a lot of data here. We just wanted to provide the tax rates for the other 3 business categories for the same jurisdictions that we surveyed. There aren't too many consistent themes on this table for tax rates across these different cities. I will point out that in general, and I use that term very loosely, cities tend to have higher tax rates for the services category. And that category tends to generate the most revenue for these local governments. Next slide. So if the city were to increase the tax rate from 1/10 of 1%, the current rate, to the maximum rate of 1/5 of 1%, we estimate an annual tax increase of about $1,000 to a business with $1 million of reported gross income. Businesses reporting less than $200,000 in gross receipts are exempt from local B&O taxes in Burien, so they would not be affected by this change in the tax rate. And then next slide. In summary, increasing the B&O tax rate is estimated to have the largest impact of all the revenue options that we evaluated, with the goal of improving the long-term financial sustainability for the general fund. We estimate that increasing the tax rate from the 1/10 of 1% rate as it is currently to the 1/5 of 1% is expected to generate about $1.7 million annually beginning in 2025. And if you can go back to slide 3, I believe. I apologize here. I just want to remind folks into context of the $1.7 million relative to the other options we looked at. Can we do that? Here we go, this slide here. Oh, one after, there we go. So you can see on this slide the options that were evaluated and just the order of magnitude difference for the B&O tax rate increase. And then if you can just jump back to the very last slide of the presentation now. So historically, a allocated portion of the B&O tax revenue has been allocated to economic development. And I believe the term, it's 40 to 50% is the target range of that revenue source to be allocated to economic development. If the city were to double the tax rate, it wouldn't necessarily increase the expenditures for that department by twice as much. As a result of that change, there's a recommendation from the city staff in terms of relaxing that requirement. And so that has 2 purposes. One, it allows you to still maintain funding for economic development at the current level, but also doesn't restrict the city's hands in terms of using that excess revenue for other purposes to support other general fund services. Because this is a tax, the city can allocate the use of that revenue for any legal and lawful purpose. That concludes my presentation for tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have. Thank you.
Any questions? Councilmember Mora.
I was wondering if you could do the math for me. A business that currently makes $200,000, how much would they be paying then if we raised it?
Should know this off the top of my head. If you raised, it would be about $200 per year, I believe, if my math checks out. That would be the net increase if you were to assess, if you were to not exempt that business anymore.
Thank you.
Any other questions in council?
I just want to thank you for the presentation. I want to thank you for reiterating this information to us multiple times because it does sink in gradually so that this time when you said it, it felt like you were saying things I knew, where the first time I was picking up on new information. So it's that is appreciated.
Other questions? Well, thank you for the presentation, and this will come back to us when we discuss budget. Thank you.